Good evening, PWCS families, and welcome to tonight's Family Engagement Series session. Tonight we have Scholarship Search and Financial Aid Awareness. Today's presentation will be recorded and will be presented in the requested languages of English and Spanish. We will begin interpretation once this slide is reviewed in the requested languages. So if you're on your computer, you're going to look for the interpretation button on your control bar. Once you click on it, you're going to pick the desired language. Then your icon should change. If you're on your phone, you're going to click on the Join Audio and click Call over Internet. Click on the three dots and more. Click on the language interpretation and click on the language you want and done. At this time, the Spanish interpreter will review the slide.
Buenas noches y bienvenidos. Para español en su computadora, busque el globo en la parte inferior, haga clic para activar y escoja español. El icono cambia a ES, que es español, haga clic para listo. En su teléfono, haga clic para unirse al audio a través del internet. Haga clic en los tres puntitos, haga clic en interpretación, escoja español y haga clic para listo.
Thank you. At this time, we will begin interpretation. So I would like to welcome our presenter for this evening. Joining us today, we have Mr. Jason Puryear. He is the director of the College Place in Alexandria, Virginia. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here with you all this evening. I'm going to share my screen so we can get going. Share. And just to confirm, everybody can see the slideshow now with the QR code, sign up.
Looks good.
Awesome. Thank you. So just to begin, again, my name is Jason Puryear, and I'm here from the College Place in Alexandria. It's a resource center that works with students and families as they navigate through the journey of finding the best fit post-secondary opportunity for the student. So I'm not tied to any 4-year or 2-year institution, public or private. My goal is to make sure students have the information they need to make a well-informed decision about what comes for them after high school. So this pathway, this program this evening is focused primarily on students who will be going into 2-year or 4-year colleges following graduation from high school. And if you scan the QR code or use a bit.ly site to sign up for more information and to stay in touch with me through the College Place, you'll just be sure to select the College Place Alexandria as your TCP location. The formal title for the presentation this evening is on winning scholarships. But the goal is to cover this basic agenda that's in front of us. So I'll start with level setting in terms of facts from what I know on my end of this process. Then we'll touch on different sources and areas to search for scholarships as you, either the student or you as parents, guide your child through this process of finding funding. We'll talk about the different types of scholarships that are out there, touch on eligibility components that are important for students and families to consider as you build this search for yourself. We'll talk about the different search engines that I recommend to students and families, and it won't be a comprehensive list of all the engines that are out there, but I'll also add in advice for using other engines that I don't cover as a part of this presentation. We'll then go to application components and things to consider as you build your strategy towards applying for scholarships and how to keep everything organized. Because organization, believe it or not, is one of the harder parts of this process to get down, especially if the student is applying to tens or maybe even hundreds of different scholarships. Staying organized is a very pivotal part of that process. And then I'll end my presentation this evening with tips and next steps to consider as you go through this process. So the beginning of this presentation always starts with defining what is a scholarship. I like this activity, this prompt, when I do it, especially with students in person, because I think sometimes they think with this prompt, I'm trying to stump them. It's a very straightforward question. What is a scholarship? And to define it. So it's money that's awarded by a school, organization, outside agency to help a student pay for their education. full stop. So it's meant to be just, let's define it for what it is, money to help the student pay for their education. Scholarships can be used to pay for tuition and fees, books and supplies. If a student is commuting to and from campus and they're maintaining a vehicle, putting gas in, having hopefully insurance to cover their vehicle, they can use scholarship funding to pay for all those things. Sometimes when I meet with students and families, they think the scholarships can only be applied towards direct costs, so costs that are billed by the institution. And that's not the case, generally speaking, scholarships, unless there is a definition under the scholarship itself that says this can only be used for tuition and fees, or this is applicable towards a specific major. Usually they're unrestricted in terms of how a student can use them in terms of covering their educational expenses. So here are some statistics that we've gathered through research on our end. Individually speaking, 1.8 million individual scholarships are out there for students to apply for. This number fluctuates, so it's an average in terms of the research that we've done on our end. You may find sites that say it's closer to 2 million, maybe a little bit lower, depending on which source you're looking at in this process. So do keep that in mind. This is information that we pull from a few different resources, most of which are highlighted through the sources at the bottom of this slide itself. The average scholarship is worth about $7,900. The exact figure I want to say is $7,923. But I mention this because a lot of times when I meet with students and families, students may start with wanting to apply for 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 full ride scholarships, and those opportunities are absolutely out there. But the best chances students have, I think, from a competitive standpoint, tend to be lower dollar scholarships. But there's a range in terms of funding that's available. The U.S. Department of Education itself awards scholarships through the financial aid process, some of which will be tied to the Student Aid Index, or SAI, which students will only be able to receive by completing the process of their FAFSA, submitting that form and having that form processed by the Department of Education. A student who applies for scholarships in this process of working through what their best fit institution is, on average, will receive about $18,000 more in funding, both through the institutions they're applying into, but also from private sources. So for students who are actively engaged in this process, and this isn't a guarantee, because I can't guarantee that, because every year I meet with a handful of students and families who have done everything right and don't get what they expect out of this process. So that is possible. But on average, if students are putting in the effort, and I'll describe a little bit more about what that looks like in a moment. But this is the amount that you can expect to receive, both through institutional and private sources. Athletic scholarships, even though they get a lot of attention when they're announced, especially full ride athletic scholarships, they only comprise about 2% of the scholarships that are given to students in this process of helping them pay for their education. So it's a very, very small portion of the scholarship funding that is out there. And the piece of advice that I always offer to student athletes who are looking to continue with their athletic involvement in college is to make sure that you understand what athletic scholarships mean, both in terms of a time commitment, in terms of your practice schedule, if there are majors that may be discouraged, depending on your season and what that schedule looks like. And to have an honest conversation with your coaches and your coach about what the scholarship will cover and what it doesn't. What are the metrics that you have to hit in terms of maintaining the eligibility each year? If there's GPA requirements, if you're Division I, it could be purely athletic based, so based on your performance as a student athlete on your team. Division II, you're going to see more academic scholarships come in, and then Division III, purely academic. So just make sure you understand what goes into the athletic scholarships if you're in a position to be awarded those in this process. And then over 100 million in funding goes unawarded every year. And that's primarily because students aren't applying for those funds. And these unawarded funds tend to be smaller dollar scholarships, $500, $750, $1,000, where if a student is in a situation, which I can understand from a logical standpoint, if you're in a scenario where you've got a $25,000 gap between what a college may be offering with financial aid and what you may have to find out of pocket to help you pay for your cost of attendance. I can understand why a $500, $750 scholarship might not feel like it's worth your time. But those are the funds that are the easiest to get statistically. Those tend to be local scholarships that are either tied to an area that a student lives in, maybe even down to the high school that they attend. It could be based on a neighborhood that they grew up in. So don't leave those small dollar scholarships in this process, even if you have a large dollar figure you're working towards. Every scholarship is worth your time. If the student is a good fit for that scholarship, then they need to apply for that funding. There are myths out there in terms of scholarships that are available to students and families. One of which is that scholarships are too competitive. If a student is only applying for nationally competitive scholarships or maybe awards that you have to be nominated by your high school to even be in the running for in terms of consideration, it can feel like that. And in this process, especially at this point in senior year, it is very common for scholarship organizations not to have the capacity to be able to respond to students as they're applying for scholarships. So the competition level can even feel greater because you're not hearing anything back in this process. If you're in that position, especially as a senior, I want to encourage you to keep going at that process. Not hearing anything doesn't mean that you won't eventually be awarded a scholarship or that you're not in a position to receive scholarships later this spring. But it can feel like, especially when announcements are made in school, that only the top scholars in your class or the top athletes are getting scholarships. They may be getting the biggest scholarship awards in this process, or can feel like that because of the announcements and the attention that they get in this process. But there are scholarships out there. Part of this is making sure that when you go through this process, that you think about every characteristic as a student that could work towards getting a scholarship in this process and in your search process as well. There's another myth that only low-income students can get scholarships. There are definitely pools of funding that are limited based on the household income, the student index that I mentioned earlier. But that is not the majority of scholarship funding that is out there. There's also another myth that only high school seniors can apply for scholarships. If you're not in your senior year and you're listening to this presentation or maybe even watching it as a recording in the future, and you're sitting in your junior year thinking about what you can do to be proactive in this process of finding your best fit college, finding funding, you don't have to wait until your senior year to apply for scholarships. Now, there are some scholarships that are for seniors or current college students only. They'll list that pretty early on in their description. So you can eliminate the scholarships, at least for right now, as an underclassman from your process. But there are some scholarships that you can apply for as early as your freshman year. So you don't have to wait until your senior year to get this process started. And then I've already touched on this earlier, but small scholarships are absolutely worth your time applying for. If it takes you 30 minutes to apply for a $100 scholarship and you get it, you just made the equivalent of $200 an hour in that process. And I always encourage students and families that I'm talking to and working with through this process to think about it that way. If you think about it on an per hour basis in terms of how long it took you to apply for a scholarship and the funding that you get on the back end, sometimes that helps with motivation and to stay motivated. It's not perfect because it's not always guaranteed that you'll get smaller scholarships, but those are the ones that tend to have fewer applicants. And in my experience, you're more competitive to get just by applying to those scholarships by their deadline, not applying after the fact. These are different sources in terms of areas to look for scholarship funding. Definitely don't look past the colleges and universities that a student has applied for admission into. Sometimes these colleges require the FAFSA, maybe even the CSS profile, or the VESA if a student is not eligible to receive federal aid. There may be an institutional scholarship form that you have to fill out in addition to or in place of some of the forms that I've already mentioned. Sometimes the funding is available through the alumni association or whatever that governing body is for that institution. So it's tied to the institution, but not directly through the admissions process. So as you're looking at the institutions that the students applied for admission into, check the admissions and financial aid website to make sure there's no additional forms that a student can fill out in terms of getting access to other scholarship funding that may be out there. Some admission offices will offer scholarship funding later in the process after they've admitted a student. But most of these deadlines for college-specific funding will start as early as November 1st senior year, and can lead out into the spring a little bit further, depending on the college, university, or even the alumni organization that you're talking about at that point. There's different organizations out there, civic organizations, scouting organizations that will look to give funding to help students pursue their education. So maybe it depends on your involvement right now as a senior in high school or an underclassman if this is not your senior year yet. That could be a way to tap into funding if you haven't joined an organization or if you haven't gotten as involved. If you're in your freshman or sophomore year listening to this message, getting involved in organizations is a great way to tap into funding in your senior year, maybe even in college once you enroll. There's different businesses out there that are looking to fund the next generation of their employees in their respective field. So some businesses will allocate funding for scholarships for that reason. There's different foundations out there. Jack Kent Cooke, Coca-Cola, Posse are ones that immediately come to mind that have larger scholarship opportunities. Some of which, if you don't tap into these funding opportunities before your senior year, you can find yourself in a position to not be competitive for those awards, because a lot of those national foundations that have larger dollar scholarships available, those deadlines may be late August, early September, at least in terms of some of the initial documents that you have to upload or profiles that you have to build on their website. So it starts very, very early senior year, whereas some other foundations that may be more community-based, community-focused, they may have scholarship deadlines in February, March of your senior year. So foundations can be all over the place in this process. There's governmental agencies that'll give out funding based on maybe results from your FAFSA or your student aid index. It could be dependent upon the major that you're going to enroll into as a prospective major, or even the institution that you want to enroll in. So part of the funding from a government level could come down to what institution do you choose to enroll in. So some of that funding might not be unlocked until you submit your deposit, give your indication that you're going to enroll in the college by May 1st of your senior year. There's different charitable organizations that look to give out funding. Sometimes it's based on need, sometimes it's based on your involvement in your local community, contributing a certain amount of service hours towards X, Y, or Z cause. There are employers that will give out funding, and I mentioned this from two different perspectives. For seniors, if you're working a part-time job now to help you save money either towards your first car purchase or to help you save money for books or other expenses that you can take care of financially in college. Don't forget to ask your employer about educational benefits that you may be able to tap into. Some employer educational benefits, Target comes up a lot as a question on my end. They want students to study specific majors in college to get access to that funding. Whereas another employer, as long as you're working X amount of hours now as a senior and maybe even X amount of hours as a college student, they tend to keep the hours low in terms of the requirement, but they may give you access to funding to help you pay for your education, not tied to a major, but based on your continued employment with them while you're an undergraduate student. But also for parents. Parents that are listening to this message, you might not have been in a classroom outside of checking in on your son or daughter, but for yourself in a classroom in 20 or 30 years. So the employer you're with, you might not have even thought about them or known about their existence the last time you were in a classroom to learn for yourself, but there are employer-sponsored benefits that you might be able to tap into to help your son or daughter pay for college. Another employer-sponsored benefit that may be out there in terms of funding is tuition reimbursement. So as you make qualified payments for your son or daughter to pursue their education, they could reimburse you depending on your organization's policy, employer's policy. So for both students and parents, make sure you check with your employers to see what benefits may be there, whether that's scholarship funding that you can apply for, or even tuition reimbursement based on payments you make during the academic year. And there's individuals out there that will give funding for scholarship awards. And keep in mind, as a part of this, one of the hardest things to wrap your mind around is that depending on what source you're talking about, there's deadlines that will pop up all throughout the course of an academic year. Because depending on the source, they have different deadlines in this process as well. So be keeping that in mind. This is a process you got to kind of check into again and again over the course of the year. It's not a one-time thing in terms of searching for scholarships. These are different types of scholarships in terms of classifications. So there'll absolutely be scholarships based on merit, whether that's a purely GPA, what courses have you taken kind of conversation. Sometimes merit will have an academic component tied to it in terms of the major or the area of study that you want to go into. There are certainly need-based scholarships, so based on the student aid index from the FAFSA or the VESA, that you'll need to have to qualify to be in the running for these scholarships. Some scholarships are based on your identity, and your identity can be a race, ethnicity-based scholarship. It could be focused on the faith that you practice. It could also be focused on characteristics that are much broader than that. So, are you left-handed? Are you redheaded? There are different identity-based factors. There are multiple identity-based factors that can come into the conversation at this point. So this is a place where when I'm talking to students, especially about this, that I ask them to think about every way that they walk through and exist in this world, because there could be an identity-based scholarship based on that one facet of who you are as a person, that you can search for in this process as well. It could be career-based. So on the similar line of thinking where a merit-based scholarship may be tied to major, maybe I'm talking to a student who is focused more on a community college pathway after high school, and they're looking at starting work maybe even within 6 months of graduation from high school. So there could be a career-based funding source that is tied explicitly to following that pathway following graduation from high school. And then there are scholarships that are tied specifically to colleges and universities. So the only way to get those scholarships is to get admitted into those institutions and apply for that scholarship funding from that institution specifically. Beyond that, there are eligibility components that you have to hit. Scholarships usually list this in the first line or two of their description to make sure that they are getting the information about their resources to students who would be a good fit for them. Some scholarships are location-based. If your student has limited or does limit their search colleges only in Virginia, you could be missing out on location-based scholarships from institutions in Maryland, Pennsylvania, DC, West Virginia, that could have scholarship funding for students from out of state or nearby states. Some scholarships have citizenship limitations, so they may be for U.S. citizens only. They may be for U.S. citizens, permanent residents only. Some scholarships may be for international students only, depending on the organization and where it's headquartered. So to keep that in mind, there are different organizations that will look for students based on certain demographics. So where they come from, where their family may come from, what faith they may practice as a family or even as an individual. So again, as I'm working with students, I cannot emphasize this enough. I literally want them to think about every way that they exist and live in this world, and to keep those factors in mind when searching for scholarships, because personal attributes come up in this process as well. Sometimes it could be based on whether or not you're a twin, or a multiple birth, a triplet, or more. It could be based on your enrollment status. So some scholarships are specifically geared for students who are enrolling full-time to pursue their education. Sometimes there are some funding that are geared towards students who are working full-time and taking classes part-time. So keep that in mind as you go through the search as well. It could be based on your area of study, what you want to major in, specifically, or if you have a broad interest in engineering or in healthcare, as an example, there could be funding for students that are going broadly into those areas, but not tied necessarily to a major like mechanical engineering or nursing or physician's assistant, as an example, at a specific level. Some educational scholarship funding can be based on the educational level that you've already attained or are hoping to attain. So some scholarships are geared towards bachelor's degrees only, or first-time bachelor's degrees. It could be for students pursuing an associate's degree only, trade, technical certification. But the scholarships will list what their eligibility level is as a part of their eligibility components for that scholarship funding. So just pay attention to that as you're applying for funding as well. And then last but not least, the activities that you're involved in, either as a high school student or in your community, as you practice your faith in your place of worship. All those activities could feed into eligibility components for scholarships. So leave no stone unturned. A lot of these organizations are not necessarily looking for you to be involved in an activity all 4 years of high school. They're looking for some involvement, though. So what was that length of involvement, time of involvement can be important for some organizations in this process as well. So when I'm meeting with students, I ask them to think about all these different categories. So starting off with physical attributes, there are scholarships out there for left-handed people. There are scholarships out there for students who fall out of the quote-unquote normal range in terms of height on both ends of the spectrum. So literally think about every way that you walk through this world or move through this world, rather, because there may be scholarships based on your ability or those with different abilities in terms of their ability to access or move through the world as well. So think about all those things. Think about where you live. Think about where you're physically based in terms of your location. There are scholarships that are geared towards students that live and grow up in urban environments, very specifically, from suburban environments and from rural areas. One of the interesting things about Prince William County, depending on how you classify where you live, there are location-based components that you can fall into depending on what part of the county you're coming from and where you grew up. There are absolutely scholarships out there that are based on your race or ethnicity, and it's up to the student to self-identify in that process. Most organizations don't check. The only exception to that would be scholarships from tribal communities. Sometimes they ask for registration information. So the parent or guardian maybe has to be enrolled with a tribal nation for the student to be eligible for that scholarship. But outside of that, typically there's no request to prove that background. From there, different activities that you're involved in, whether it's sports, band, the arts, those could tie directly into scholarship opportunities, whether or not you want to continue with those interests once you go into college. Sometimes the funding is tied to continuing that involvement. Sometimes it's just to recognize you for the work that you put in through your high school career. What skills do you have? Are there specific skills that, even if it doesn't tie to your major, are you an excellent public speaker? Do you have an interest in gaming that might not tie to your major? Those could be skills that you show through a scholarship competition that allows you to get funding just to pursue your education in general, even if it doesn't tie to a skill set that you have to have in the major that you want to enroll in. And then last but not least, what interests do you have, whether it's music, the arts, anything broadly defined, whether it's tied to a major or an activity or skill set that you have now, that could tie into scholarship funding that you apply for in this process. In terms of your strategy, I want you as a student, parents working with your son and daughter, with your child in this process, to cast a net as far and as wide as possible in the scholarship search process. Start local. Pay attention to messages that your student, I know, is getting from the college career counselor. I've worked with all the college career counselors at every high school in Prince William County. And I know they're sending messages to your students about local scholarships. So one, if your student tells you that they haven't heard anything, I would encourage them to check their email because there's usually at least 10, 20 unread messages. A lot of the counselors that I work with put out newsletters, messages blast, student aviance, whatever your counselor's method is, they're usually sending that information through multiple sources to try to get to the student. So check with your student first. But start with your high school and the community that you live in, because those local scholarships are the easiest ones to get too, from a statistical standpoint in terms of level of competition. And then don't forget where students are working and where parents are working as well. From there, go regional. Think about the system that you're in. So Prince William County Schools, there may be scholarship funding that is out there just for county graduates that are going into post-secondary ed. Think about the district maybe that the student competes in from an athletic or a band standpoint, or from artistic competitions as well. And then state fits in regional in terms of the level of competition as well. But think about that in terms of casting that net a little bit wider. And then last but not least, national scholarships, the platforms that I'll mention a little bit later in this presentation, casting that net as far and as wide as possible. One of the pieces of advice to keep in mind is that every level you go up in terms of the search strategy, the higher the competition goes, generally speaking, because the wider net that you're casting in this process means that there's simply numerically more students who are eligible to apply for this funding. So the higher up you go in terms of level of competition, the more students you're competing against and the harder it can be to get this funding. So I recommend a strategy that incorporates all these different types of funding, local, regional, nationwide, in terms of the scale of your search and scope. These are different search engines that I recommend students and families use in this process. These are not all the search engines that are out there. I don't necessarily have a favorite on my end because I found through just working with students that some sites are better for them in the individual searches than others. So I recommend utilizing and at least checking out all these search engines on the screen here to see what works the best for you as a student or for you as a family in this process. And keep in mind that as you build your profiles on these sites, they're going to ask for some personal identifying information. It is not uncommon at all for them to want the student's name, the high school that they're attending, what grade they're in, the community that they're growing up in, some basic preliminary information about their parents, maybe their parents' educational level. That is all normal information for these search engines to request in this process. Information more about the student, what major they want to pursue, maybe what career they want after graduating. And sometimes when I'm meeting with students, especially, this question comes up a lot more often with young women than young men. But there could be a concern about safety in terms of sharing too much information personally with these sites. And I get that. And the best advice that I can give in that scenario is to trust your gut. If a scholarship organization seems legitimate, especially if your college career counselor is advising you to apply for funding through this organization, then there's been some research. We feel good about the place that you're sitting this. But if you're going onto a scholarship site, because these search engines are great about getting information to you, but they can't fact check everything. So if you feel uneasy about a scholarship source, then just cross it off your list and don't move forward with that. There's plenty of different opportunities that are available to you. So don't limit yourself on that end, and just keep it moving through this process. If you find a search engine that's not on this list that works better for you than any of the search engines on this list, go for it. If it works best for you in this process, you feel like you're getting scholarship matches that fit you as an applicant, and even better, you're getting scholarship funding through that search engine, please use it. So this list is not, again, meant to be exhaustive, but on the front end, when the student builds their profile, the more specific you can be, the better the results are. If you just say that you want to go into a 4-year institution after you graduate, that you're not sure about your major, and you don't add a lot of personal identifying information, the scholarship results that you get back will be very generic, and they could end up not fitting you or not fitting you well. So you can feel this is one area that seniors especially get disengaged in this process, and because they weren't specific enough on the front end. So the more detailed you are on the front end when you build these profiles on these sites, the better and more tailored the results will be on the back end. In terms of the applications themselves, like I mentioned, they're going to ask you for your full name. They'll ask you for your date of birth, address of where you live, contact information to be able to follow up with you. So the email address, phone number that you enter into these sites will be points that they'll use to contact you in the future, possibly. They'll ask you information about your school. So where you're enrolled, what grade you're in, information about the classes that you're taking, the grades that you've earned. They may ask for additional information depending on the scope or the scale of the scholarship. So keep in mind, again, trust your gut. If a site doesn't feel right, if you're checking a scholarship site and they don't have a secure encrypted box on your browser, maybe that's not an opportunity that's a good fit for you. It is possible that a scholarship site out there could be trying to steal your data. It's rare, but I mentioned that one because you always want to check the browser, the website that you're going to make sure that it is a legitimate scholarship. If it's coming from your college career counselor, they've done their due diligence, but it never hurts. Double check on that end. When I say that because I go through have a lot of trainings that come up more from an IT side of things on my job, and they always mention that check the sender in terms of the scholarship link that's being sent to you. Check the site that you're on to make sure the site makes sense. But that can be an easy tell for where outside person entity may be trying to fish for information. Just be careful on that end. And I mentioned that one because the scholarship search engines that I just mentioned, again, they're really great about linking to information. They just don't have the capacity to double check the veracity of all the sites that they list through their site. So just word of caution, just be careful as you're going through this. Make sure the site that you're submitting information through is encrypted, so it's protecting your data. If you want to Google an organization, instead of clicking directly on a scholarship link just to verify that the organization is legitimate, that the scholarship link is legitimate and this opportunity is legitimate. That's a good way to double check in this process. But all these data points on the screen are things that scholarship organizations will ask for legitimate information, absolutely, to share with them in this process. Some organizations may ask you for a resume, or you might not be sure how to start in this process. So I advise students before you even dive into the search engines, take an opportunity to organize your resume in terms of things that you want to highlight for scholarships and organizations in this process. One, because in the moment, it can be very hard to remember, especially senior year, everything that you did beginning maybe even the summer before your freshman year of high school. So take time to just list down every extracurricular activity that you've been involved in from maybe even, again, the summer before freshman year, all the way up to maybe middle senior year right now. List volunteer work experience. One, because it gives you the opportunity, again, to double check to make sure you've captured everything that you've done. Be careful about listing volunteer experience that you were a part of because of extracurricular involvement. So double listing involvement at that point to bulken up your resume. Don't worry about that. List the experiences for what they were. One, because it gives you the opportunity to touch base with the organization maybe that you volunteered with, the employer that you worked with, to double check the time commitment that they can confirm on their end, because some scholarship organizations will ask that volunteer organization, that employer, for verification of the hours that you gave. You want to make sure you have that information correct on the front end when you're submitting your application, so it doesn't raise a red flag on the back end when you're being considered for a scholarship award. At that point, list different academic experiences that you have, honors and awards that you may have received at any point during your high school career. Again, it can be hard to remember all of this in the moment. So having this organized in one place to go back to and refer to as you're filling out scholarship applications can be important. List your high school, especially if you moved between high schools. Having the dates that you were at a specific high school can be a factor in some scholarship search processes, so do keep that in mind with your start and end dates. They may ask for the colleges that you've applied to, or maybe more specifically the major that you want to enroll into, or future looking what career you want to go into after you complete your degree. And then make sure you're proofreading and editing things as you put them together. Some organizations may ask you for a resume in this process. So as you're building these components to submit to organizations, make sure you're proofreading and double checking editing as you go through this process as well. Some organizations will absolutely ask you for your transcript. Some may ask for an official transcript to be sealed from your high school. So keep that in mind, especially as you're working up against deadlines. If you have a deadline coming up of February 15th, it's probably too late to get an official transcript from your high school for something that close. Still submit the request. My recommendation is that you give at least 2 weeks notice in this process, just to give your college career counselor time to work through getting that transcript printed off into an envelope, sealed, and then put into the mail from the school. If you're working that close to a deadline, see if an unofficial transcript can kind of be a placeholder for you in this process. Some scholarship organizations will allow you to submit an unofficial transcript, and then when they give you the scholarship award, one of the requirements on the back end to receive that funding may be if submitting that official transcript on the back end as well. And some scholarship organizations will ask you for financial information, some of which you may only have by submitting your FAFSA or VESA. So when I meet with students and families, especially from the DC metro area, if both parents are working full-time jobs, a question I get often is, Jason, we're not going to qualify for need-based aid. Why is it worth my time finishing the process of filling out this FAFSA or filling out this VESA? And this is why. Scholarship organizations will ask you for your student aid index, for your FAFSA submission summary, or the submission summary from the VESA. If you don't have that data to share with them, you're not in the running for that scholarship funding at that point. So this is why it's absolutely important to complete the process of applying for financial aid. You want to have the data to share with scholarship organizations when they ask for it on the back end. Some scholarship organizations will ask for letters of recommendation, much like the college admissions process. You want to ask teachers that know the student well. Sometimes it's a teacher that is teaching them in their senior year. Some students may go back to a teacher that had them maybe 8th, 9th, 10th grade, so knew them over a course of a number of years, but maybe hasn't taught them in the last year or so. It's up to the student to determine who can be the best advocate for them in this process. Sometimes it's not a teacher. Sometimes it's a coach. Sometimes it's your priest or another religious figure. Sometimes it's somebody that knows you well in your community. It could be an alumni of the college that the scholarship is for or from. So as you think about who you want to write the letter, just think about the person who can be the best advocate for the student. Don't think about the title that follows their name, and don't necessarily look for somebody that's tied to the organization, even if they work for the organization or are an alumni of the college or university that the student is applying to. If they don't know the student well enough, they're not in a position to be a real great advocate for the student. So it's more about who knows the student best in this process than what connection to the organization or the scholarship they may have on the back end. Again, minimum 2-week notice. You want to give people time to write a really great letter for you in this process. The less time you give them, the harder it is for them to put together something really well thought out, for them to have time to proofread and edit the back end. When I worked for another program and I worked more directly with students in terms of this scholarship application process, I always ask my students, if you ask me to write a recommendation letter for you, I want a few things. One, a formal email with that request, the deadline for when you need that recommendation letter back from me. And my hope was that they were asking for it way in advance of the scholarship deadline itself. Wasn't always the case. Didn't always get 2 weeks notice, but I absolutely needed information about the scholarship. So a link to the website for the scholarship organization. If you got a pamphlet or a handout at school, take a picture, email it to your recommendation letter writer, or hand them the piece of paper about the scholarships so they have something to go on to tie you as an applicant into the scholarship process itself with that organization. And then last but not least, a thank you note is always appreciated in this process. As a professional, I keep my handwritten thank you notes just as a reminder to myself for students and families and schools that I work with over the years. But two, from a practical advice standpoint, the students that show appreciation and gratitude in this process are the first ones that come to mind when the next opportunity comes across my desk. So from a strategic standpoint, saying thank you is helpful, because the next time a scholarship opportunity that is a really great fit for you comes across that teacher, that coach's desk, you're going to be the first person they think about. in this process. So just showing gratitude is just helpful from that standpoint alone. In terms of essays, short answer responses. I have worked with students that are applying for local $500 scholarships, statewide competitions that ask for an essay or two in this process, up to national competitions. They may ask for an essay or two or three and have an interview that are tied to this process as well. At every level of scholarship competition, you want to make sure you answer the question that is being asked or the prompt that is in front of you. It never fails. Every year, no matter what level of scholarship competition I'm reviewing for, I'm able to eliminate sometimes up to half of the scholarship applicants because they didn't answer the question in the prompt. It can be sometimes that simple in this process, just making sure you answer the question that's asked, which ties very closely into following directions. If a scholarship organization is asking you to write a 500, 600 word essay and you've written 250, 300 words, at this point, in my experience, I can tell just by looking at it that you fell short. And so make sure you're following directions in terms of word count. If there's any structural requirements like double spacing, certain fonts that you have to use in this process, make sure you're following those directions to the T. If you give yourself enough time in advance of a scholarship deadline, it gives yourself time to proofread to make sure if you have a favorite font that you use in general, that you've changed the font if a scholarship organization is asking for Times New Roman 12 point font as an example. But you use Arial and Arrow as an example. In this process, you choose what you share. I've been doing this work long enough that nothing is going to throw me in terms of what a student shares. But if you say you're in a room of 25 people, which might be your average class size right now, if you feel uncomfortable with that room anonymously reading what you've submitted in terms of your scholarship essay, then that's probably too personal to share. On the other hand, if you're okay with a room of people that don't know you, maybe even at all, reading that essay about you, then you've struck a good balance in terms of maybe what's too personal to share or kind of walking up to that line of what's too personal for you. But you are the only person as a student who can really define that for yourself. Write with the reader in mind, with the expectation that they know nothing about you. So you may need to introduce a little bit more of yourself than you might have to when you think about yourself or an essay that you might write for a teacher or a coach that you know really well. Use positive language, even if it's about a difficult time in your life, a difficult subject, difficult topic. You always want to be positive and forward-looking in this process. One of my colleague in Connecticut likes to bring up the 3 Ds, so death, divorce, and debt in this process. One, because unfortunately, it's something that all of us, the longer we live, deal with in some capacity. The good thing about that is that it's life. So we know that everybody goes through those things at different points. The bad thing about that is that it's life and that we know that everybody goes through these things at certain points. So if you're writing about something that is a very common experience, it can be hard to stand out in this process. Tailor the message to you as the student, as the applicant. Even if you're writing about something like this, if you talk more about yourself and overcoming things and looking forward to the future, the opportunities that lay ahead, you can write about that. It can be hard to stand out if everybody in the applicant pool is writing about the same kind of thing. The exception to that would be if there's a scholarship geared towards students coming from or overcoming this type of barrier. They may ask you to touch on how you overcame that type of barrier in this process. That's the only exception to this rule. You absolutely should be reusing and recycling essays in this process. A really great personal statement could be workable and usable for a college admissions application, a scholarship application, and maybe even a prompt that an employer asks you to write a little bit about in a job application. Something that's good, that is a great reflection of you, can be used over and over again. So you don't have to create something new, unique for every scholarship that is out there, but do make sure you proofread. The example that I used to give from a college admission standpoint is that if you're applying to the University of Virginia, you might not want to have an essay that mentions Virginia Tech or William & Mary as your first choice. That doesn't mean that the scholarship essay or the admissions essay might not be a good fit for you, but if you're on the margins, not having proofread to make sure that you listed the correct organization, institution in your essay could make a difference in that process. So give yourself time. Ask for feedback, ask your friends, ask your parents, ask your teachers, ask your coaches. Those different people have different views of you as the student, and you're the only one that really knows all of who you are 100%. As parents, we want to know that about our children, but I've lived long enough to know that best friends know you differently than your parents do. That's okay. So ask both to read these essays, to give perspective about you, to make sure your whole self is being presented in this process. These are different essays examples. I'm going to start jumping ahead because I know I'm getting closer to time. But again, as you read through prompts, make sure you answer the prompt that is in front of you, that you don't go off on a tangent. Give yourself the time, sometimes within 250, 300 words, to fully go through every piece of the prompt that is in front of you. Again, send thank you notes, send thank you emails in this process to let your supporters know that you appreciate their effort. You want to avoid scams, especially as you've gotten into your senior year. You may hear from organizations that will plug up things like the scholarship is guaranteed or your money back. My general advice in this process is to not pay for free. If they say they'll do all the work for you, that's just not true. The honest answer in this process for the student, and you might not want to hear this though, is that you got to do the work. You got to put in the effort. Your parents can help you. Your coaches, your teachers, your friends can help you in this process, but you have to put the effort in. You have to put the sweat equity into this process to get results. If they ask you for credit card banking information, it's a scam. Can't get this opportunity anywhere else. I showed you earlier in this presentation different search engines that may send you the same scholarship depending on how specific you are in your profile or where they pull information from. There's a lot of different places you can get this information from in this process. Make sure you check out FAQs on scholarship websites, especially if you're reaching out to ask them questions. Make sure you do the work on the front end to answer questions on your end, so that one, because a lot of scholarship organizations are run by volunteers, so they might not simply have the time to answer a question about an email that they have more detailed information on their website about. So check with FAQs first before reaching out to the organization. And if they don't answer a question under the FAQ or they don't give you enough information, start from there in terms of what's available on their site or what's not available, and then ask for further details beyond that. If you need a scholarship allocation tracker, this is one resource that we have on our ECMC website, all of which are free tools and resources for students and families to use in this process. If you want to print it out and have paper and pen or pencil to keep yourself organized, stick it on the refrigerator so mom and dad see it in terms of what you're doing in this process or how they can help you stay organized. If you want a digital document, create a shared Google document. Whatever you need to keep yourself organized in this process, you want to make sure you give yourself a system that works for you. In general, this is a 10-step process to make sure you're staying organized. It starts with applying for financial aid. This is a national presentation that we do, so the VESA isn't listed here, but on this first line, FAFSA and or VESA, depending on your status, applying for federal and or state aid. You want to get organized before you dive deeply into this process. Whatever that method is, whether that's pen and paper, digital document. If you, as a student, need to get your mom or dad to download an app on their phone and show them how to use it, invite them into your digital world, but get organized on the front end before you dive deeply into this process. Set goals that are realistic. If you know that you need $100,000 in scholarships, only applying for $1,000 in scholarships every month is not going to cut it. So what is the goal that's going to meet what you need in this process? Search for scholarships that fit you. Do avoid scams. I'm not going to touch on every point here, but use this process to keep yourself organized and focus on your main goal, which is getting funding to help you pay for your education. I've already mentioned some of these tips on the previous slide, but I cannot emphasize enough how much this is a time commitment on the student's end. As a senior right now, 2 hours a week you need to be setting aside to apply for scholarships, whether that's setting up your profile on the site, proofreading essays that you're submitting in this process. The further we get into the spring, the higher up those number of hours in terms of time and commitment goes. And then ask for support where you need it in this process. Your college career counselor, every single one in the Prince William County system, is great at what they do in terms of their job. But you need to ask for their help and support in this process as well. So make sure you check in with them for guidance and support. Start locally. Please use a personal email address. If you already have an email address that you've used for your college applications as a senior, use the same email address so that admissions, financial aid, scholarship information is all going to one place that you can keep track of. Do make sure you follow instructions and prioritize time in this process. One of the great aspects of getting organized early on, especially if you have a list of all the scholarships that you're applying to and their deadlines, you can organize the work and the effort that you're doing by the deadline of the scholarships as they're coming up. That's one way to keep something manageable and take bite-sized chunks out of it instead of trying to go through a list of 100 scholarships all at once. That's overwhelming no matter how organized the student and family is in this process. But you got to apply, you got to work through the process, create systems that work for you. Please do follow up and check both your email and your phone number, whatever data points you're giving organization to follow up with you, because maybe the organization only has the capacity to call you and to leave a voicemail. Students, if you're on Do Not Disturb and you maybe have never checked your voicemail since you set your phone up, got it activated. They may not email you. They may only leave a voicemail, and if you don't follow up with that voicemail, you lose that scholarship opportunity because you didn't take advantage of that contact point that you gave to their organization. Just make sure you're checking everything: voicemail, email, whatever that is in terms of point of contact. Regular mail, even though there's fewer scholarship organizations that send out anything in the regular mail now. And then in terms of notifications, make sure you're organized and you're following up with those organizations in terms of what they need from you to get access to this funding, especially because a lot of this notification and request for follow-up happens after graduation. So if you know you need official transcripts for 20 different organizations, ask for that before you graduate. It's a lot easier to get access for your college career counselor to access information for you while you're still enrolled in school than what happens after things start sunsetting after graduation as you head towards your freshman year of college. And then last but not least, I don't think I'll have time for a lot of questions, if any, but if you need follow-up and support from my end, please don't hesitate to reach out. It does take me a little bit to get back to emails at this point. My inbox has hundreds of messages on a daily basis, which is great because a lot of people need help, but I mentioned that because a lot of people need help. So just give me time to get back to you on that end. But also feel free to call me or text me, especially for students. They usually end up being more comfortable texting me than calling or emailing. But whatever contact method works best for you, please reach out and ask for support along the way.
Thank you so much, Jason. We always appreciate you coming on and providing this great information. For our families, just a reminder, I am going to provide a copy of today's presentation as well as the video recording, so you have it as a resource. Jason mentioned FAFSA and VASA. He did come on the Family Engagement Series earlier this year, so we do also have that video recording, so I'll make sure I'll send it to you as well so you can view at your leisure. And as always, thank you guys so much for joining us today. As Jason said, if you have any additional questions, I'll make sure to include this information in the follow-up email that I send everyone. And if you have, I ask that you just take maybe a minute or a couple minutes just to fill out the survey for tonight's session. Just let us know how we're doing and, the type of sessions you want to see in the near future. So thank you again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you.